From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is the Morning Edition. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Tuesday, September 3rd. Cartoonist Cathy Wilcox once said that cartooning is an art form crying out for attention. The domain of attention seekers who, when they were young, were the kind of kids to foist their drawings in their parents' faces for approval. Maybe so, but during Wilcox's 35 years of drawing cartoons for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, she's also been our conscience. She's made us do double takes about some of the most vexed and perplexing issues of our time, like discrimination and violence against women. Today, Cathy Wilcox on how she's used cartooning to help navigate the last couple of fraught years, and which cartoon led people to call her a bully. So, Cathy, you have been drawing cartoons for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age since 1989. So I would love to start just by asking you about what a typical morning for you looks like. I mean, are you flicking through the paper? Are you scrolling online? How do you actually choose your topic?
The morning is a broad gleaning process. I sort of wake up and turn the radio on and listen with one ear to sort of what they're talking about on morning radio. And over breakfast, I am usually with one eye on the newspaper and possibly with an ear on the radio and possibly with another eye on the mobile phone and looking and seeing what's being talked about on Twitter. You know, as I say, it's a gleaning process. It's what is everybody talking about? What's the story? I rely very much on the sort of the happenstance or the serendipity of hearing, say, a phrase, uttered by a politician when they're, giving their press interview or something, and they'll have a string of words where I'm as interested in what they're trying not to say as what they're saying, because that's what's going on. Always, there's always the crafting of the message there. So I try to uncraft that message, and sometimes that will give me an obvious lead to what I might be drawing a cartoon about, because I'll be I suppose unpicking the logic or the rationale of what is being said. I have a 5 o'clock deadline, and so it's a fairly chaotic but methodical. Can both of those things exist? Because it's variable. Every story is different. Every idea is different.
And you really have a knack, too, of getting to the heart of an issue, though. And some of the biggest issues that you cover over and over again include some of the toughest, I'd say: racism in Australia, violence against women, and LGBTQ rights. So when you do look back on your career, is there a certain work that you're most proud of that really comes to mind?
Yeah, well, there's been a few standouts. I did one of in about 2016, I think, that was about an asylum seeker who set himself alight. Now, that's just happened again in the last several days. A Tamil asylum seeker has likewise self-immolated. At the time, I understood it, and I looked at footage of this, because it was somebody recorded on their phone this guy lighting himself up, and it was so very shocking. And I just sort of thought, what would take you to that point, that's your logical course of action, that you are going to kill yourself in such a vile and horrible, and painful and visible way, and you think then of the process that has driven somebody to that point, and it was the process of our indefinite detention, and our system for treating asylum seekers as if they were criminals, as if they were non-humans, really, and as if their humanity didn't matter. And all the while with the rationale put forward by the various political parties to say that we had to be strict like this and brutal in our regime like this to discourage others coming to Australia by boat, because that's what they were obsessed about, was the boat arrivals, never mind the plane arrivals and so forth. And because having them drown at sea would just be terrible. I just drew the image of the guy on fire and did a long title that was about, this is the result of the Australian government's policy to prevent boat arrivals. And the editor at the time said, the image is really strong, I just don't think the words are there. Can you sit with it for a bit longer? And I then kind of got the idea of boiling it down to just simply not drowning. Here is somebody not drowning at sea. So the title was just not drowning. And that just received a huge reaction to, and a largely positive reaction, but I think also a very kind of visceral. It cut through viscerally because it was such a stark juxtaposition of supposed policy, pretext of policy, and the outcome that it was delivering. And we've become inured to that actually by now. Like that rationale gets used all over the time.
And so tell me, Cathy, about the most controversial cartoon perhaps that you have ever published, or the one that received the most emotive feedback.
Feedback has got so different, as we know, since social media. So in the past, and before social media, before Twitter, feedback was the occasional letter to the editor, or the occasional letter to me, or email, or something like that, directly like that. But going through the baptism of fire of Twitter, finding out what happens when you say something that a bunch of people disagree with strongly, and then having them come back at you, you have to learn again and again to toughen your skin. I have nevertheless had my stomach turn to water and my knees go shuddery at opening up Twitter and seeing negative feedback to something I've done.
So tell me, give me an example when you've received that sort of feedback. Was there a particular cartoon that either people just freaked out, or they just, wrote back and said, you're just wrong, you're just wrong?
I think the one in recent memory that felt like the worst I'd ever had was to do with Lydia Thorpe.
The former Greens Senator.
Former Greens Senator Lydia Thorpe, First Nations woman. And I had her walking into the room. She had just announced that she was going to be prosecuting the No case for the Voice to Parliament. And what's more, that she wanted to be a part of the drafting of the pamphlet that was to put the No case. And that was in the same week as Peter Dutton and Pauline Hanson had all been putting their views about No, and that they were going to be writing the pamphlet. So I had a cartoon of her walking into the room with Dutton and Pauline there, and Dutton is leaning forward, handing her a pen. And I got this barrage of hate on Twitter from people who felt that no ill could ever be said about Lydia Thorpe, basically, that I was so wrong, to merely depict her was racist, really.
Wow.
I mean, I want to be open, especially when it's dealing with issues like First Nations issues where I feel like I've been paying attention for years, like I know it's a very sensitive thing. So I really don't want to get those things wrong, and I don't want to be insensitive. And so I felt like all I was doing was just going, well, in joining in the No case, she is, in political terms, she is joining with these people, whether or not her reasons are the same. I understood that her reasons for No were a very different thing to the reasons of No for Dutton and Hanson. But the feedback on Twitter was just very hateful. And the scariest thing for me was having somebody even said, "Oh, Cathy, she's a bully." All these things that sort of turned me upside down and really, really floored me for a couple of days, because, of course, I had to interrogate absolutely everything about myself. And I thought, bully? Gosh, I've never seen myself like that. Oh, my gosh, So, I ended up getting some very supportive feedback from other people, especially other people involved in the Voice campaign, and especially some of the most outspoken advocates for the Voice among First Nations people of profile. They had been retweeting my cartoon and saying, yes, this is it. And I kind of also was made aware that there was this crew of people waiting to advocate for their hero, for one thing, and to frame any criticism of their hero as punching down and disempowering and racist and all the rest of it. So, that was a bit of a shocking experience. But once again, came back to who are the people who are criticizing you, what's going on, what's their agenda, understanding that people have also very, very passionate feelings, especially if they have been copying it, because there was a lot that I understood, and sympathized with there. But copying it in such a personal way was hard.
Well, it's a good insight into, I think, what might be, best phrased, the fearlessness perhaps that is required if you're going to be a political cartoonist in particular. And it brings me to a question I really wanted to ask you about a particular cartoon. It was about violence against women and really was comparing the reverence we have for our fallen Anzacs and the way we think about women who are the victims of domestic violence, because I was really wondering whether you were worried about fallout from that one.
Basically, Anzac is our religion in Australia. Having watched what went down with Yasmin, Abdel, Magid.
5 years ago on Anzac Day, Sudanese-Australian writer and broadcaster Yasmin Abdel Magid put up a post on Facebook turning the words "lest we forget" into a statement to highlight the plight of refugees held in offshore detention.
It sparked a vast and often vitriolic response, which saw Yasmin leave the country that she called home.
And I saw that whole treatment. And yet, during that same, during this year's Anzac commemorations, we were also counting yet another bout of violence against women. More women killed at the hand of their angry partners or whatever. So that was undeniably going on. That's being talked about a lot more probably than when Yasmin was saying what she had to say. But what she said was perfectly reasonable and perfectly arguable, and it was just completely taken and run with in the manner of the culture wars. So I felt that making a comparison between the fallen soldiers,
because the panel has at the very top it says "lest we forget," and on the left above a row of graves it says "men and women who gave their lives for their country," and then on the right you've got the identical looking graves, but it says "women who lost their lives because men got angry."
We're forever being presented with this sort of, I don't know, a very, very contradictory view of whose lives have value, and this reverence for people who've given their lives for the country. Never mind if you start to analyse what that conflict was and what pretext, led to that conflict and what dirty stuff happened there and all the rest of it. We still have to be reverent. And then, here are women, they're not exactly giving their lives. They're not choosing to give their lives or signing up to it. Well, what they're doing is just getting on with lives and being killed because of men who can't control their anger. And I just thought the numbers are piling up there year after year. Why don't we give that, the similar kind of reverence and in memory of commemoration as we do for these fallen soldiers? So I did that. And I also took a bet. I took a punt, Sam, that as a white woman, as part of a mainstream newspaper, I would not cop the flack that Yasmin Abdel Magid copped. I wouldn't. There would be some people who would criticise it, and there were, but I just anticipated that would be, that it was going to be worth doing it, because I thought it was a comment that was absolutely, you couldn't argue against what I was saying there. Maybe what I was thinking, maybe they'll think it's too hard, but I was very glad to have the editor come back and say, we're prepared to back it.
We'll be right back. You once said, "My work has the potential to help someone thinking in a moment that they're not alone in thinking the world has gone crazy." So is that still what drives your work? I mean, and is what motivates your work that you're often the person thinking the world has gone crazy. How do I process this? How do I understand this? Is that what drives you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Exactly. How do I frame it? Give it, I don't know, put it in context, or give a frame of reference that goes, no, you can see that this is what's going on here, can't you? Let's show the workings. And so the racism one was just taking basically our entire history of racism. and I was initially going to show Barnaby Joyce, because he was one of the people who spoke about it and suggested we were not racist. I was going to show him on a mountain built of these things, but then I realized no, it's not the mountain, it's the ground, it's the layers of ground.
And just explain to listeners what, very briefly, what this cartoon looks like. Essentially, it's strata of levels that basically makes up our earth, and on the bottom is terra nullius, and then above it is layers of massacres, and it's just lists: massacres, poisoning, dispossession, and then above is white Australia policy, and above is racial slurs, and then eventually it keeps going up and up and up. Stolen generation, kids in custody, and then above that, unfair advantage.
Right up to the most recent, incidents, even where we're talking about slashing immigration, and that the voice would give Indigenous people an unfair advantage, or that we're going through a terrible period of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and all that sort of stuff. So just to show that it's not an idle thing to say we have racism in this country. It is a thing that is actually, it's who we are, who we've been. It's not contestable. It's not just an opinion or a bias. It's here is the evidence of what we're built on. Doesn't mean that we're irredeemable. It doesn't mean that there are not a lot of great people and open-hearted people, and that many of us are working towards a sort of a greater understanding of humanity. But if you can't look at what you are, then how can you ever become anything else?
Which brings me to my last question, Cathy, which really is about the power of cartoons. Because like you say, it's not without risk to publish anything that we publish, and that includes your cartoons. But what is it about cartoons, do you think, that can really drive home an issue, or perhaps make people think differently about something in a way that perhaps an 1,000 or 2,000 word feature can't? I mean, what is it?
Well, it's direct, isn't it? It goes through it. Maybe it reaches an emotional receptor in a person that 1,000 written words doesn't. So it can speak kind of quickly in that way. And also, I've been speaking lately about the idea that a cartoon can make a thing easy. You can serve something up to someone and as a fully formed idea and say, here it is, here's what I think, what you should think. I like to think that there's a gap between what I do and what the reader gets, so that they have to actually take a step towards it to enter it. If there's a couple of moments that they have to think about what it is that I'm saying, or put it together or something, I think that's not a bad thing as well, because that's a kind of engagement for a reader. That if somebody will see a cartoon of mine and go, well, I used to think this, but I had a look at that cartoon of yours and actually you made me think about it. I mean, that's maybe happened once or two times. But apart from that, absolutely hopeless, failed task. The world is going to shit, and I have not been able to stop it. Yeah. So I would have to say that all up, my mission has failed on this earth.
Well, what is it that Samuel Beckett said? Fail again, fail better. So I think you're on task. I mean, like I look at my own work the same way. It's like there's failures every day, but we try, Cathy Wilcox, don't we?
And you can also, and like, you got to respect that deadline. I can only put in what I can put in by deadline. So I have to kiss goodbye this could have been better, or this could have been more perfect, or whatever. I have to absolutely not be perfectionist, because that would screw me up totally.
Well, Cathy Wilcox, I know that I am speaking for a lot of listeners when I say that you've absolutely helped me really understand the heart of so many issues that are often so incomprehensible, and you have often made me laugh. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Samantha.
Today's episode of The Morning Edition was produced by Chi Wong. Our head of audio is Tom McKendrick. The Morning Edition is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. And sign up for our Morning Edition newsletter to receive a comprehensive summary of the day's most important news, analysis, and insights in your inbox every day. Links are in the show notes. I'm Samantha Salinger Morris. This is The Morning Edition. Thanks for listening.